He was known as Saul of Tarsus. His family moved to Jerusalem when he was at a very young age. I put up here approximately 5. That seems to be what a lot of the people think. Okay? Not really important. Just threw it up there to give you an idea. Sometimes we get confused with young and adult and all from that generation or that era versus ours. But his family did move to Jerusalem. And if you'll notice here, his parents were of Roman citizenship. That becomes important. We see that during Paul's ministry a couple of times, he pulled that card out. Acts 25 is one example. He pulled out the card of Roman citizenship and used it. These next one is very important. Saul studied at the feet of Gamalia. And because of that, we can make the last statement that his family was probably wealthy. In Saul's day and time, only the elite, only the upper people in the upper economic levels, the rich, if you will, they were the only ones whose kids were going to get educated. The average people, their children were not going to be formally educated. Saul was formally educated. And not only that, but he sat at the feet of what many historians consider to be the greatest teacher of the time, with Gamalia. This is like a Rhodes Scholar here, folks. This is like Harvard or Yale or whatever. Okay? He is learning from the best. And from that, Saul became a great Pharisee. Saul knew his stuff. He says himself that he was a Pharisee among Pharisees. First place we're going to turn here in just a second. You'll see where he talks about him versus his contemporaries. So Saul was highly educated. That gives us an indication Saul came from some wealth. Well, what difference does that make? Well, as we go through his life, I think it's very important that we understand this man, at one point in time, he had it. He had wealth. Let's go ahead and skip ahead a little bit. He had power. He had influence. This man could walk in to the synagogue and say, hey, there's a group of Christians trying to worship over here at Central Church of Christ. I need the paperwork to go take care of that. And he could walk right in here and have us drug off to prison. Have us beaten. Have whatever. Sometimes executed. Okay? Saul, and I've read this in some quote historical or whatever, some of the experts say, he was the up-and-comer of the Pharisees. I read one guy that said if we compared him in today's world, he was that young politician headed to the top. And I found it interesting. This guy said he was the John F. Kennedy of his time. That's Saul. Keep that in your mind. Think about what this man has. Think about his life he's living. Folks, he's living the good life. He's living the good life. And he's got power and he's got influence. The thing we need to know about Saul here, Saul was full of zeal. Saul was a worker. Saul thought he was doing what God wanted. He was protecting the Jewish law. He was protecting it from these up-and-coming Christians. They have attacked God's law. They have attacked God's people, the Jews. And so Saul is going to protect them, protect God. Keep in mind, Saul is thinking. He thinks he's doing the right thing. I was told a lot of times in my life, son, you don't need to be thinking. You ain't got proper equipment for that. Let me tell you something. When it comes to our soul and it comes to eternity, we better quit thinking and we better start finding out. We better start thinking what I think and look and see what he says. Because I got news for you. Going back to my childhood, sorry young people, I know this won't make any sense to you. But what I think, what I believe, don't amount to a hill of beans. It's about what God thinks and what God says. That's what matters. Look, if you will. I don't know what's going on. Maybe need a battery. Maybe I just don't know what I'm doing here. Where is the on-off switch? I may have the wrong button. I do. That'll have a lot to do with it. Hey. Hey. I got the wrong. What are they giving me two controls up here for? It's like home. I don't know which one to use. I go downstairs and there's two. You got to use two controls, and I never know which one does what. I start playing, and somebody, I won't call any names, Becky Dodd, or finally just reach over and say, "Give me that. I'll fix it. What do you want it on?" Okay. See, maybe that's my payback for saying I was sharp a while ago, right? For lying to you. I just paid for lying to you is what I did. Paul gave his all, but he was going in the wrong direction. He gave everything he had, but he was going the wrong way. He wasn't doing what God wanted him to do. Look in here in Galatians chapter 1, verses 13, 14. And some of this I'm going to put on the screen so you don't have to turn, but this one we're going to turn to. Here Paul says, get that out of here. Pick it up again. Paul says here, talking to the Galatians, and what he's doing is he's trying to prove to them that he's somebody they need to listen to. Verse 13, chapter 1. For you have heard of my former conduct in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. How I persecuted the church of God beyond measure. Key words. I didn't stop at enough. I didn't stop at adequate. I carried it to the next level. I carried it on to the next level. And I tried to destroy that church. That was my goal. Like I said, Saul, Paul, same men, different missions, different directions. Saul's direction was to destroy. Paul's direction was to build up and edify. Look at verse 14. And I advanced in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries in my own nations. He's saying, hey, I was top of the class. I was up there at the top of the class. Being more exceedingly zealous for the traditions of my father. A couple of key things here. He's talking about how hard he worked and how zealous he was. One of the greatest coaches of all time, Pat Summitt. She's famous for a statement, and I may not get it word for word, but it's similar to this. You don't have to be the smartest person in the world or in the room, but you can always be the hardest worker. That was Saul. Saul not only had the smarts, apparently, but he was going to outwork everybody. He was going to give it everything he had. He was going to give all that he had for this. But look in verse 14, the last part there. He's doing this, we know, for the Lord, trying to conserve Judaism. And he says, for the traditions of my fathers. Saul not only had in mind what God wanted, but he's also thinking, this is what my forefathers, this is what my daddy, what my granddaddy, what all these before me. And I'm going to fight for those traditions. I'm going to fight for what I've always been taught, what I've always believed. I'm going to fight for it. Well, he is for now. In Acts chapter 8, verse 3, I can halfway read that. I lied to you, Jeff. I can't read these. But Saul was ravaging the church. This is important. Get this in our heads. Ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and I underline women for a reason. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. Remember just now in Galatians 1, he said that he worked above measure. There it is, folks, women. Now keep in mind who he's attacking, the church. But he even went after the women. Sorry, ladies, but in this day and time, they would have gone in those houses, drugged the men out, and left the women behind because the women really didn't matter. They weren't too worried about the women. And when I say drag out the men, some of the accounts that I've found say that men could go down as young as anywhere 12, 14, 15 years old. What we think of as still children or boys or, sorry, teenagers. Saul went above measure. He took it to the next level. And then look at this one. Let's turn here. Go to Acts chapter 9. Let's just turn over there to Acts because we're gonna be there for a minute or two. We're gonna jump out of it for a second, and then we'll get right back. Acts chapter 9, verse 1. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that he, if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. All right, we see here his power. We see here his influence. He goes in. He says, kind of paraphrasing, there may be a group of Christians up at Damascus. I need the paperwork to go get them and drag them back here so they can be tried and persecuted. Okay. So Saul's going to head up the road a little ways, right? I have a note in my Bible that I put in there a long, long time ago, and I can't tell you where it came from, that says, distance from Jerusalem to Damascus, 240 miles. 240 miles. Wasn't on interstates. Rough terrain, mountains, dangerous roads, animals, thieves. There might be some Christians. To get a little perspective, sometimes I need help with perspective. Here you go, 240 miles. He's going. Distance from Paducah to Chattanooga, Tennessee, 232. Columbia, Missouri, 241. Indianapolis, Indiana, 228. Huntsville, Alabama, 246. Frankfort, Kentucky, 229. And just for you misled people, Lexington, Kentucky is about 255. That gives you some perspective of Saul's determination to attack the church and how he was going to go after them. But there's a problem here, folks. Being misguided, being on the wrong road, it leads to damnation. We want to go home one day. Where's home? This world's not my home. Where's home? Heaven. I want to get to heaven. That's the road I want to go on. But if I'm on the wrong road, I'm going the wrong direction, I'm not ever going to get there. It's kind of like a buddy of mine. I won't call his name. People in here know him. And at the time, he was still working for his dad. His dad was still alive, still running the business. Now it's his business. This was probably 40 years ago. He was young, in his 20s. His dad sent him to Nashville to do some work in the government housing projects. He can tell you stories of what he saw down there that curled your hair. He despised the work he was doing. He despised the place he was at. He was living in a motel. He hadn't been married very long. He was down there maybe 2 weeks without coming home. And all on his mind was to get home. Get home. Back to Paducah. Get home. Friday night, he stayed and worked late. Finish up some stuff so he wouldn't have to spend one more night and finish up on Saturday. Late on Friday night, he jumped in his truck, and he was known for driving kind of fast anyway, even when he didn't have to. And he took off out of Nashville, and he blew through Nashville, and he said traffic was light, and he said I was hauling it. As Darrell Waltrip would say, he was going boogity, boogity, boogity. And he said, I come through Nashville, and I'm thinking, boy, I'm making some time. I'm going to be home soon. I'm going to get home to my wife soon. I'm going to be back in Paducah. I'm going to have this in my rearview mirror. And he said, I come flying out of Nashville. And he said, you know, up there at the north part of Nashville, there's a place where I-24 goes one way and I-65 goes the other. He said, I miss 24. And he said, man, I'm hauling it down the interstate, and the only thing I'm worried about is I hope there's no police out here. I hope there's no state troops. I'm going to make it home in record time. He said, this is what's going through. And knowing him, he's telling you straight up exactly what was going through his mind. And he said, I'm going to make record time back to Paducah. And he said, I'm flying along, and all of a sudden I start seeing these signs talking about Bowling Green. He got to Beaver Dam, and he made a left turn so he could go home. Yeah, he was getting there. He was going as hard as he could, as hard as he dared. But had he not made the turn and headed toward home, he was going to see Louisville and Indianapolis and whatever's north of there. Don't know. But he sure wasn't going to see Paducah. He wasn't ever going to make it home. Not till he got on the right road and started heading the right direction. I'm going to show you this. This is a passage that I go to a lot. This is one that scares me a lot. 1 Peter 1:10 tells us to make our calling and election sure. It tells us we better get in there and know what we're thinking, what we're believing. Notice what I said a while ago. It don't matter, but we better make sure it's right. But then the one that just really scares me is Matthew 7, verse 21 through 23. Let's read that together. See if this doesn't describe Saul. Jesus is speaking. For those of you that might not have red letter edition, Jesus is speaking. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. You mean as long as I just say, you mean tell me that just saying, I believe in God, that's all I got to do? Everybody going to go to heaven that believes in God and lives a good life? It's not what he said. It's not what Jesus said. Don't argue with David. This isn't David talking. Jesus talking. Verse 22. See if this doesn't sound like where Saul would be in this. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? In other words, haven't we gone out here and worked for you? Haven't we tried to do things and we did it because we loved you and because we thought it was right? I did it because I thought I was doing the right thing. What did he say in verse 21? Only those that do the will of my Father. Not your will, but my Father's will. And then here's the scary part. Verse 23. And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Can you imagine standing before the Lord thinking you have worked so hard to serve the Lord, but you didn't do what His Word told you to do, and hear Him say, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Boy, if Saul doesn't make that turn, for almost his name, for my buddy, if he hadn't made that left turn at Beaver Dam, for Saul, if he doesn't make that U-turn that's coming, he's not going home. Jesus is going to say, depart from me. I don't even know you. I don't even know you. Some of us might need to do some self-analyzing sometimes, David Dodd. Hope you're listening. Some of us need to make some U-turns. Let's go back to chapter 9. Well, no, let's back up just a minute. Galatians there we saw Saul was attacking, and I had highlighted the church. Okay? Saul went after members of the church. Now, we're not going to get into a lesson on the church is the people. I think most all of us in here understand that. The church is the people. It's the Christians. Okay? But I want to go just a second, and I want to take a look. Who did Saul attack? Number one, he attacked Christians. And in doing so, he attacked the church. Saul understood that. Saul knew what he was doing there. Saul understood that by getting these Christians, he was trying to destroy the church. He said so himself. What is the church? The bride of Christ. Church was bought with a price. The blood of Christ. Who sent Christ to die and shed that blood? John 3:16. For God so loved the world, He did what? He gave. It was a gift. God sent His Son. Parents, somebody out here is doing something terrible. Osama bin Laden after 9/11. He's captured. He's standing trial. His sentencing, death. Parents, you want to grab up one of your kids and go up to that judge and say, whoa, judge, my kid here, he's a good Christian. He's going to go to heaven. Take him out and execute him. But don't execute him, Sama. We need to try to teach him. We need to try to help him. We need to give him another chance here. I can honestly say this parent would not do that. No. But in essence, isn't that what God did? In essence, isn't that what He did for me? He did for you. Let's look in Acts chapter 9 here. Again, in verse 3. As they journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul. Listen to this. And again, if you don't have red letters, Saul, Saul, we're in red letters. The voice he's hearing is Jesus. Why are you persecuting me? Whoa. Whoa. I'm persecuting the church. I love God. Jesus says, you're persecuting me. Verse 5, and he said, who are you, Lord? I always found it interesting that he used the word Lord there. And the Lord said, again, we're back to red letters, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goat. Attack on the church equals an attack on the Lord Jesus Christ. I want to attack the church. I'm attacking Jesus. Now let's go back. I don't know what Judgment Day is going to look like, but let's go back and stand before Jesus in the judgment and be asked this question. Why did you persecute me? Oh, well, wait a minute, David. Slow down. Put it in reverse. Back it up, Terry. Back it up here. You done gone too far. You're getting out of hand. Am I? Am I? Getting ahead of myself. How many people? I know it's happening. I've seen it. Okay? How many times have you gotten upset with somebody at church? The elders made a decision you didn't like. Somebody said something you didn't like. So you go to work and you start telling everybody, those no good elders up there, can you believe they did something this stupid? Man, we got this guy we go to church with, old Brother Joe over there. Man, I have been at work when people have brought me their phone. Look at this. You wonder why I don't want to be a Christian? You wonder why I don't want to go to church? And sometimes it's not involving the Church of Christ. Look at this stuff that people are putting out here about what happened at their church Sunday. Folks, we've had people real close to home get upset about something somebody did. Something said in a prayer. Decisions made by elders. And they run and grab that laptop and they get on Facebook and here they go. And they attack whoever it is that upset them. They attack who made them mad, who hurt their feelings, who didn't give them their way. I'll never serve on another committee up there. I was on that committee and I wanted to do it this way and they didn't want to do it my way and I ain't doing nothing else. And here we are, we're sending it to the world. Let's back it up just a minute, folks. Attack on Christians equals attack on what? And an attack on the church equals attack on who? So the next time before I hit sin, I might want to stop and think that when I go in and I attack that Christian on social media for everybody, folks, I've gotten phone calls. Maybe I'm going too far here. One that's in my mind right now, person does not go to Central. Okay? Got a phone call from one of my daughters. One lives in Murfreesboro, one lives in Knoxville. They're not close. Phone call. What's going on with this person? I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen them in 2 months. Well, and starts telling me this stuff that they have posted. An all-out assault on members of the church where they're worshiping. An all-out assault on the elders and deacons of that church. I don't know what to tell you, huh? She said, well, I'll see them pretty soon, and I'll ask them. Listen to this answer. She saw the person in a couple of weeks like she knew she would. She asked them what it's about, and they said, oh, it was nothing important. I just needed to vent. I just needed to vent a little. No. What you did was you attacked the church, which means you attacked Jesus Christ. Folks, I've had people come to me and say, hey, what is this about? I don't do Facebook. I have a Facebook account. Okay? Rachel set me up one during COVID so I could watch the services when all the services were online. I found out the day after my 40th class reunion that we had a class reunion the day before, and everything was handled on Facebook, and David don't do Facebook, so David didn't know. So one of my lovely children showed me that I could find, and our class does have a Facebook page, and so I, maybe once a month, go click on there, and I'm way behind. Last time I clicked on it, I had missed 2 deaths. That's how often I check it. I can talk about this one because I'm not in this one with social media. But have I done it at work? Have I done it in public? Have I done it around other Christians that affected their thinking? Folks, I've had people come to me and say, have you seen this post? Boy, you couldn't pay me to go to that church. You couldn't pay me to be around those people. Maybe we need to realize. I said we're going to relate to Saul and Paul our life. Am I like Saul? When I get upset, I get my feelings hurt, I don't get my way. Am I going to attack other Christians so that I'm, in essence, attacking the Lord's church and the Lord Himself? But now we got Saul on the ground. And Saul's told to get up and go to Damascus, and he goes. Saul gets to Damascus, and he's blinded. The light blinded him. He's still blind. He's sitting in Damascus. He's blind. And the Lord sends Ananias to see him. Folks, if there's ever a man in the New Testament that does not get the credit he deserves, Ananias is that man. Saul is persecuting. Saul is putting Christians to death. You say, well, we don't have actual record of that. It's at the prison. Who was standing there when Stephen was stoned, and whose coats? Where were the coats being put? Yeah, Saul's feet. And a lot of these being taken to prison were being put to death. Yeah. And Ananias went. I mentioned Osama bin Laden a while ago. This would be kind of like having the Lord say, hey, Osama's holding up in this here building. I need you to go over there and talk to him. If I'm going to commit suicide, I'll pull a gun out and shoot myself right here. I'm not going through the torture that he's going to put me through. But no, Ananias went. Enough of Ananias getting off track at that time. So we've got Saul. Look in verse 17 and 18. And Ananias went his way and entered the house, and laying his hands on him, on Saul, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you came, has sent me to you, that you may receive your spirit and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Immediately there fell from his eyes something like scales. and he received his sight at once. And he arose and what? Was baptized. Saul still needed to be baptized. Saul needed to be baptized. You know, Saul had all the reasons. My first thought was excuses. I said, I'm going to be nice, put reasons. Then the nice left me halfway, and I put both of them up there. Not to be baptized. Why does Saul need to be baptized? Look for a minute. Look with me. In verse 15, backing up, the Lord talking to Ananias said, Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before the Gentiles. He's a chosen vessel. God chose him. But he still needs to be baptized for the remission of his sins. There are other people, and I hear people say, well, as long as you just receive the Spirit. I was at church, and that preacher was preaching, and the Spirit came down. I felt it. I received the Spirit. I used to flip around sometime and listen to some of these preachers on TV, just kind of hear what they're teaching. Kind of get an idea of what's out there. And I've seen one that said, if you will put your hands on your TV and repeat after me, you will receive the Spirit. And then they had some people on there that, when I did that, I felt it. Let me tell you something, folks. Go back over here. The light from heaven blinded Saul. He fell to the ground. You don't think he didn't feel it? I would have felt something. Probably felt something warm and wet because I'd probably wet my pants. I'm just being honest here. You don't think he hadn't got the feeling? 3 days he sat there blinded. I'd love to know what went on in those 3 days. We don't, because we don't need to. Yeah. He had gotten that feeling I'm getting. Chosen. Received the gift of the Holy Spirit. Look in verse 17. We just read it. Verse 17 said he received the Spirit. He's already received the Holy Spirit. Now I'm going to get into some that we use. I've always been a Jew. It was good enough for my family. What did he say back in Galatians 1:14? What was the last part of 1:14? He was defending what? The faith of who? Not only the Lord, but who? His fathers. The traditions of his fathers. Well, believing what I believe and doing what I'm doing, it was good enough for my daddy, and it was good enough for my granddaddy, so it's good enough for me. I'm going to go back to my original. We better forget what I think. We better do. Not everyone who says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter. This next one kind of goes along with it, but I'll have to go against my family. What's my mama going to think? What's my daddy going to think? I have reason to have some understanding on this one, to have a little knowledge on this one, and I can tell you this. What I know is, I know less. What I know is that I have looked myself in the mirror and said, would you have had the guts to do it? And I don't know. I don't know. I didn't have to. It's one of those you got to be there. For those of you who don't know, and she don't mind me telling, my wife was raised in the Catholic Church. Yeah. Strong Catholic family. Her aunt was a nun. Hello. Hello. That's getting pretty strong. Yeah. And I know she was worried. She wanted to be baptized. She knew she needed to be baptized. I could tell it. I could tell it. But what's Mama going to say? Will Mama disown me? Mike De Niro talks about the same thing, and his grandmother did disown him for several months. Would not speak to him. His grandmother, he said, was the closest person in his life, the person he worshipped on this earth. And she wouldn't speak to him when he was converted. So by watching that, I know I don't know for sure. But folks, we better put God first. I know some people say, well, you don't understand. I promised a family member that I would never change. I wonder if come judgment, if that family member or that family member goes before you. Remember the guy who wanted to go back and warn his family, warn his brothers and all? And Jesus said it won't do any good. It won't do any good. He wanted to go back and warn them. Turn. Boy, I wonder if those people wouldn't say, let me get back to my child. Let me get back. I got them to promise something I wished I hadn't. I don't want them to suffer. Folks, I will stand here, and I've said it before, and I will probably say it again. If there's ever a man on the face of this earth that wished he could tell you that being baptized is not essential to salvation, and that's the only way we come in contact with blood, Galatians chapter 3, that's how we put on Christ, it's me. Because I've got family and I got friends that don't buy that, they don't believe that, and they're not doing that, and it breaks my heart. And I wish, but the more I look in that book, the more I study it, the more definite it is. That is a step that has to be taken. Baptism not needed as long as I think God, we mentioned that. And Saul knew he was going to lose his position of power. His position as the Pharisee, the up-and-comer, the Pharisee. Real quickly, we got 5 minutes. I'm going to run through these. We're not going to read any of these, but you can get them. If you want to get something out of it, take these verses, read them, and think about them a while. Paul gladly gave up his material things. Philippians chapter 3, verse 3 through 6, he talks about he gave up all those worldly things. And what did he call them? He said, but as far as I'm concerned, all that stuff I had, that power, that money, all that influence, it was what? Garbage. Rubbish is the actual word. As far as I'm concerned, that stuff was garbage. He wasn't worried about what Saul wanted. He was worried about, or what Paul wanted. It was what God wanted. Would let nothing stop him from serving. 2 Corinthians 12, 6 through 10, it talks about the thorn in the flesh. He prayed 3 times that be removed. He had a physical limitation. How many people with a physical limitation say, oh, I can't do anything anymore. This hurts, that hurts. I've got this wrong, I got that wrong. Saul kept going. He asked God to get rid of it. Now you're better off with it. Persecutions. I wish we had time, we don't. Go to chapter 11, verses 22 through 33 and read it. Shipwrecked 3 times, spent a whole night in the sea. Anybody ever been out on the ocean in a boat? Been out there? Do you want to float around that water all night? No, thank you. I don't even want to do it on Kentucky Lake. Okay? He was beaten. He was stoned. He was given stripes. He was thrown in prison. Think about, and this is why I emphasize, what Saul had. What Paul accepted to serve God. We're comparing to Paul. How much have you given up? How much have I sacrificed? I told you. I looked in that mirror. I beat myself up good with this. Not getting his way. The Macedonian call. Hey, we can go back up to the thorn in the flesh if you want to. If you remember this, Paul wanted to go to Asia. God sent him to Macedonia. So he went to Macedonia. Did he go and say, I didn't want to be here. I ain't doing nothing no way. I don't care about these people. Forget them. Is that what he did? No, he went and he preached. He went and he taught. Because that's what God wanted him to do. Is it what he wanted? No. Does I matter? No. I will get us in trouble. I lives on the wrong road. Motivated by love, real quickly. Matthew 22, 36 through 40 is where we see Jesus being asked, what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. And the second is likened to it, love thy neighbor as thyself. Paul loved others, his neighbors, his brethren. You turn over here to Philippians and he talks about how for me to die is gain. Paul is old. Paul is worn out. Look around. We got people that say, well, I'm just too old to do anything anymore. When I try to do something, it wears me out. But I can go out and eat a couple times a week. I can make it to my grandkids' ball games. I can do that. But I can't get to worship service. It just wears me out. Romans 3, I tell you the truth. In Christ, I'm not lying. Conscious. Basically, what he's saying here is, for the Jews who won't listen, I would trade places and I would go to hell for them. I will be the one accursed. I will be the one condemned if I could to save them. You tell me that's not love for your brother. You tell me that's not love for others. And last but not least, he loved the Lord. He did everything for the Lord. He worked for the Lord. Real quick summary. Think about these. Take each one of these and say, am I like that? He knew he had to make a change in his life, and he was willing to do that. Do you need to change? Do you need to become a Christian? Do you need to just change the way you're living? He considered himself a bondservant of God. He put God first, sacrificed all he had to serve others. And last, he loved the Lord his God with all his heart, all his soul, and all his mind. Thank you for your attention this morning.